You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Happy you could join me here today on this Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday, where we're going to be covering the topic of the cortisol, blood sugar, inflammation, and weight gain connection. So even if you're not someone that's dealing with weight gain-based issues, maybe you're dealing with some type of immune-based issue or immune imbalance, allergies, asthma, headaches, skin rashes, autoimmune, etc., you're going to learn today how stress and cortisol actually affect your blood sugar, regardless of the foods that you eat, which can cause inflammation, which can then throw off your immune system. And this is something that I've been trying to teach over the last couple of years, and it's called the neuroendoimmune system. And I talk about and convey the message of how your nervous system actually affects your hormones, which then affects your overall immune system. What I want to do today is show you how stress in your life, coming from both the food or the caffeine that you're taking in, as well as the environment around you, regardless of the food, is affecting your blood sugar. And so when you affect your blood sugar, that starts a cascade event. That cascade event can then cause detrimental-based issues in terms of your overall health and wellness, or your ability to keep weight off, namely belly fat or body fat in general. So I want to get started in this way and explain to you essentially what that nervous system is. And I'm really looking forward to explaining this in depth in the upcoming integrative health practitioner because it's certification. And here's why. As a practitioner, whether you are just new, you're just getting into health coaching, or you're an MD or ND or a registered dietitian or acupuncturist, chiropractor or personal trainer or yoga instructor, anyone out there, is that a lot of times when you were learning this material, it was just kind of glazed over, and it was all in different sections and chapters. For example, so when I was going for my degree, I had a class on immunology, and I had a class on toxicology, and I had a class on endocrinology, right? All the ologies. But they were never connected. So that's the problem with our conventional medicine viewpoint, is that everything you have to go to a specialist for. Well, the problem is this. If you're always going to specialists, this is what I found out myself, right? When I was a teenager, if you're always going to specialists, well, brilliant people, but they can't make the connection of how one part of the body is affecting the other. And so when we're talking about the nervous system, we're essentially talking about what's called the autonomic nervous system. Now, there are multiple parts to it, but the autonomic nervous system is our body's ability to recognize danger and get into fight or flight, or shift from the fight or flight, which is the catabolism, that's more of the breakdown of the body, that's the aging part, the entropy, and then the parasympathetic would be more of the relaxation state, more of the healing state, more of the anabolic state where the body's building up and it's rejuvenating. So if we're in that state, we are rejuvenating and healing our body. And if we're in the fight or flight or catabolic state, while we're breaking down, we're becoming weaker and more stressed. Now, you need both. You can't go too far parasympathetic, okay? And you can't go too far into the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight. Many things in life affect that. What's affected by it? Well, of course, we know that when we're stressed, right? You might be studying for an exam. It might be a relationship-based issue. It could be something going on at work, deadlines. It might be running to catch a flight that you might have missed, stuck in traffic. Any of these things can cause a stress or stressor on the body. Now, that's from basically life work-based situations. But also, cortisol can increase or stress can increase by you actually putting processed foods in the body, high sugars in the body because we're spiking blood sugar. We'll talk about that in a moment, as well as taking in caffeine, right? So we spoke about just a couple weeks ago. Let's see if I can find that episode for you. If I can't, I'll try to link it up in the show notes as well. And that would be Caffeine and Adrenal Stress on episode 921. So try to check out that show, stephencabral.com/921. And for today's show notes, go to stephencabral.com/957, because I'm going to link you up a couple labs. You can test your own stress levels if you'd like today. I'll be talking about them throughout the show, but it's the thyroid adrenal hormone lab, the adrenal hormone lab, the sleep and stress test, hair tissue mineral analysis. Amazing labs to see your current state of stress in the body. But let's go over what that actually means. So as you spike stress in the body, let's take it from caffeine or work or getting cut off when you're driving. What happens is our body begins to increase in stress hormones. Now, I've spoken about this before, but it's worth repeating because that's how we learn. That's how we all learn as well. And then me teaching it, I even learned it to a deeper level, a greater level every time I go to teach it. So what happens is from our proprioceptors or whatever's taking in the outside information, our body, our brain basically inside what's called the hypothalamus and pituitary gland area gets signals to send out stress hormones to the body. Well, it sends a signal to the adrenal medulla, and the adrenal medulla is responsible in part from the other signals that it gets from the pituitary gland, such as ACTCH or whenever I go over abbreviations, I can never pronounce them correctly. So the hypothalamus is simply releasing something called corticotropin releasing hormone, which then tells the pituitary gland to release something called adrenocorticotropic hormone. So that's the ACTH. And then your adrenal medulla is first producing something called epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline. So what does that mean? Well, once we start getting the adrenaline flowing, you've probably heard of that before, that is when our respiration begins to increase. We can increase body temperature, sweating might increase, heart rate's going to increase, there's vasodilation. The body is getting ready to either run away or to fight. So that's the norepinephrine, that's the adrenaline part of it. At that point, we get a positive feedback loop. So we got a new feedback loop to open. Okay, the body is ready now. It's primed to fight or run away, flight. So now, though, the body needs a short-term fuel source. This is why the keto proponents are misunderstanding the body's natural regulatory systems, okay? I want to explain this in just a moment as well. This is really important because the problem is that the people who are promoting keto understand it from a nutritional biochemistry standpoint, but they don't understand it from a holistic standpoint, right? They don't from a WHOL, a holistic standpoint. And that's because they don't know how it affects the rest of the body. So when your body spikes adrenaline or norepinephrine, what happens is your body then gets a new feedback loop for the adrenal cortex to produce glucocorticoids or simply cortisol. Now, when that happens, the release of cortisol in the body is going to begin to break down liver glycogen. Okay, so what happens is the sugar stored in your liver is going to be broken down for short-term fuel. And that's because your body needs sugar. It needs glucose under duress. So if you're stressed, you're not able to get the slow burn of body fat, right? Because that's our goal, right? So when we put ourselves, again, like that's not my goal for you, but when you get into ketosis, the goal is, I'm fat adapted. You don't understand, like not you, but like the industry doesn't understand. You're fat adapted when you're meant to be fat adapted. And that's actually going to be a big part of today's show, is becoming to get you more fat adapted. And I'm going to talk about that. But you don't do that by just trying to get yourself into ketosis, because the problem is you still need glucose. Your body's going to get glucose in one way or another. So let's just say, okay, you're depleted of liver glycogen because you've gone, let's say, 3 days now with no real carbs. Okay, so liver glycogen's pretty much depleted. Your blood now is somewhere, let's say, around that 75 mark in terms of blood sugar, at least from US-based calculations. Okay, so now what's going to happen? Well, very likely scenario is that you begin to catabolize muscle tissue. Okay, this can happen quite often on calorie or carb-restricted diets. Yes, you burn body fat, but under duress, your body can also use muscle tissue. And that's because it can break down muscle tissue in order to not only get glucose from stored muscle tissue, because you might have somewhere around 90 to 120 grams of stored glucose in your liver at any given time. And after 3 days, yes, it's pretty much depleted, or 90 minutes of hard exercise. Again, it's different for each person. But when your body needs glucose, well, your muscles, there's over 400 grams of stored glucose in them. So it'll break down just enough of whatever it needs to begin getting glucose for the bloodstream under stress, right? So it's going to find a way. Now, the people that are great innovators in this space, or I shouldn't say innovators, but great researchers in this space, will actually show that they're hooked up to a blood glucose monitor, glucometer, and they're showing basically how that works. And when they take in a cup of coffee, even in a keto fasted state, they still get a spike in blood sugar over 120. Very interesting to look at that because that shouldn't happen, right? Well, yes, it's exactly right. Except when they took in the caffeine, they spiked adrenaline because they went through the same HPA axis stress, right? They might not have been stressed, but what happened is they stimulated a stress response in their body because they took in caffeine. And for them, that caused a spike in epinephrine, caused a spike, let's just call it adrenaline. From there, the body then responded in tune, which it should, by producing more cortisol. That cortisol then asked the body to release glucose from however it could get it because it needed it because it felt it was under stress, a survival-based situation, and it got it. Okay. So that's one scenario that happens. Now, let's say after 90 minutes or so, it goes back to normal, all right? That's totally normal, all right? Because after the body has gotten the glucose, your body feels it's not under stress anymore, there's a negative feedback loop. And that negative feedback loop tells your hypothalamus to tell your pituitary gland, to tell your adrenals to shut off the epinephrine and to shut off the cortisol response. Totally normal. That's exactly how the body should act. Now, the problem is that this also happens, before I get into the blood sugar part of it, this also happens during hard exercise as well. So I don't want to name the person's name that was showing all of this on Instagram because I don't want to. I know that they're a little bit more of a keto proponent, but they're kind of coming around showing that it's not the best thing in the world. It's fine for shorter stints, but certainly not in a permanently ketosis fasted state. So I'm not going to call them out because I don't know if they want that type of publicity. I don't mind because my whole goal is just the truth and I just speak the truth. That's literally it. I have no dog in the race. I don't care who's right. We use low carb in my practice in the beginning. We'll talk about that, but it's not for the long term forever. So what happens is this person, and again, I've done it myself, but I like to show that other people are doing it as well. When you do a hard workout, you're going to create the same sympathetic nervous system spike in the body. So you're going to create the same stress-based state. What's that going to do? Well, it's going to actually, again, spike blood sugar. I've been doing this for years now. So because I work with diabetics and I work with type 2 diabetics as well. So we'd show them do a hard workout, such as a CrossFit workout, and their blood sugar, keep in mind, they're in a fasted state. No sugar in the body. They didn't take any processed carbs, right? They're diabetic. They're not doing that. Their blood sugar would go over 300. Now, keep in mind, a healthy human, we want to keep that range between 75 and 95. So theirs went over 300 from a CrossFit workout. Am I saying CrossFit's bad? No, not necessarily. What I'm saying is that caused a major stressor on the body. So here's what happened. They actually needed to produce more insulin without even eating to bring down that stress response, which caused the blood sugar spike. So now this is where we get into blood sugar. So we know now that stress can cause an increase in blood sugar. Same with processed food. Of course, if you eat a lot of sugary carbs, you're going to get a spike in blood sugar as well. Well, what happens then is that your body needs to produce insulin. So your pancreas is going to produce insulin if you're not type 1 diabetic, and you're producing insulin in order to shuttle that sugar into your cells. Here's the problem though. If you've been chronically stressed, chronically producing a lot of cortisol in the body, your cells are going to become unresponsive to insulin in the long run. This is where we get type 2 diabetes. Now, here's the issue. So as you're becoming less responsive to insulin, your blood cannot stay full of sugar. And your cells know that, right? Or your body knows that in general. So your body actually keeps producing even more insulin. This is where we get into major issues. As you begin to produce more and more insulin, yes, it will eventually get that sugar into the cells, right? Get that blood sugar down. It will do that until you become diabetic, right? Type 2 diabetic or insulin resistant or even type 1 diabetic as an adult. That can happen. So what happens though is this. That increase in blood sugar is going to lead to an increase in two things: inflammation as well as body fat gain. So we're going to talk about this. The increase in body fat gain is from having the elevated levels of blood sugar without you doing the actual physical activity that would use up that blood sugar. So here's where it gets even more interesting. That's why people that are consuming too much caffeine or they're too stressed can gain body fat without excessively overeating on carbs or anything like that. So let me repeat that. Those people that are chronically stressed from any facet of their life, any way of their life, could actually put on body fat and become insulin resistant without ever eating an excess of sugary carbs. This means that carbs are not always the enemy. It is getting the body back into what's called a balanced autonomic nervous system, like balanced stress, okay? And we've spoken about this on previous podcasts. But also, this is basically a double whammy for the immune system and for gaining weight. And that's why we see so many people with autoimmune issues or low thyroid issues or Hashimoto's with the weight gain. That's just one example. But as you begin to produce more insulin, you actually begin to produce more inflammatory cytokines in the body. Now, this is an immune-based response to higher levels of insulin. It's a Th2 immune system response. What does that mean? Well, it means that you've been under chronic stress or a chronic immune-based response. This is why it leads to a lot of, I'm going to explain right now. So it leads to a lot of allergies, asthma, skin rashes, headaches, migraines, any chronic-based issue, chronic inflammation of the joints, of the skin, anything inflammatory, right? So the higher levels of blood sugar lead to the higher levels of insulin, which now lead to the higher levels of inflammation. And when we have higher levels of inflammation, here's the crazy part, it begins to then spike higher levels of cortisol again. So you can see that the higher level of stress led to the higher level of blood sugar, which led to the higher level of insulin, which led to the increase in inflammation. And then inflammation increases cortisol, which also increases our own endogenous production of estrogen as well. So now we have both men and women with excessive levels of estrogen or higher levels of estrogen, lower levels of progesterone, because progesterone levels drop over time as cortisol levels increase. Now we know why there's so many estrogen dominant, both women and men out there, who are putting body fat on around, like under the armpits and chest area, especially for guys, around the waist for everyone in the love handle issue areas. And then for women, more around the hips if they become estrogen dominant. So these things, again, there's always an underlying root cause, like always. Today, I know that I've been going through a little bit more of a complicated topic to explain, but I hope that I'm doing it from a more straightforward perspective and more real-world perspective, and showing you why, yes, diet absolutely does matter, like without a doubt, and you should be watching the overall processed carbs that you're eating. But you have to understand that you putting yourself on a keto-based diet or a low-carb diet is only part of the equation. Yes, you're not going to get the blood sugar spike by cutting your carbs very, very low, but here's the other issue. If you cut your carbs too low, what happens? Your body feels it's in a survival-based situation. Your body feels it's under stress. What else can happen if you fast through lunch and you're not the type of person that's in more of that endomorphic or kapha-based state? You're not in a relaxed-based state. Well, what's going to happen is your body, looking for glucose, if it drops into low blood sugar, if your body does not have enough glucose, a normal level, not a high level of glucose, if it doesn't have a normal level of glucose, let's say your numbers start to drop below 70, 65, what's going to happen is that your body says, hey, we're in a survival-based state. What happens? You turn back on the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. What happens there? Just from that low blood sugar. Well, the hypothalamus does what? It begins to secrete more of that corticotropin-releasing hormone, which tells the pituitary gland to do what? Release the adrenocorticotropic hormone, the ACTH, which then starts the cycle again. You produce the adrenaline, the norepinephrine, gets that respiration up, the heart rate going, and then your body begins to produce glucocorticoids or cortisol, which tells your body to release glycogen or glucose, break down liver glycogen. So then you start the cycle all over again from being low blood sugar. I hope you can start to see that the extremes of diet are never the answer. right? I'm trying to give a fair assessment of how the body works. When people talk about a keto-based diet or a very low-carb diet, we're looking at that oftentimes from a medical-based perspective of showing that, well, if we have low levels of sugar in the body, low levels of glucose, we can't feed cancer cells. Makes total sense. I agree with it. I agree with that research. But if you're talking to someone from a day-to-day basis that does not have cancer and that's looking to get as healthy as possible and that's looking to burn as much body fat as possible, it is the incorrect philosophy for the long term. And that's the problem. We've taken short-term things or medical-based procedures and somehow extrapolated that data and try to bring it across the entire population. It's extremely detrimental to the Vata body type or ectomorph body type, mildly detrimental to the mesomorph or the Pitta body type, not as detrimental to the endomorph or Kapha. And that's the problem. It can work extremely well for that individual, especially the male Kapha body type or endomorph. However, for females, even more detrimental. And I spoke about this before. And I spoke about this on the 4 foods that balance female hormones. So check out that previous podcast if you haven't looked at it. Because what happens is this. When women get under stress, and they get, again, stress from anything, let's just call it high levels of cortisol or high levels of stress, what happens is they begin to down-regulate certain hormones. And the reason they do that is to really help carry on their life, right, as well, but also not to bring another life into this world in a situation that wouldn't be balanced, that wouldn't allow that new life to thrive. So it begins to do what? Well, it begins to lower levels of progesterone. That's going to hurt fertility. That's going to make it harder for women to become pregnant with those lower levels of progesterone. They may even get a cessation of their menstrual cycle. They might go into amenorrhea or stop having their menstrual cycle. Okay, that is not necessarily the body messing up. That's your body protecting itself. It's down-regulating the ability to actually become pregnant because you, under high levels of stress, or you're not taking in enough food. We know that. We've seen that from the fitness world, the bodybuilding world, which, essentially where I came from, that's where I started, is helping people get in amazing shape. Well, a lot of women, when they start to get down to around 13%, 14%, 12% body fat, they start to lose their menstrual cycle. Their body is not carrying essentially enough body fat for them to feel they're in the right position as well to have balanced hormones and to carry on life. It's very, very normal. I try to explain to people in my practice and what I'll be teaching with the integrative health practitioners that this is normal. The body did not mess up. What happened was the body was put in a situation that it caused this to happen. And the same exact thing happens with thyroid-based issues, right? So we have about 20%, probably even higher, women, around 8% of men, and somewhere around a quarter of all women have low thyroid. And I would say it's even higher because here's the issue. A healthy thyroid has a TSH of between 0.5 and 2. As you start to creep above 2.5, it means that there's some level of thyroid-based stress. The body's not in perfect condition. But the problem is that conventional medicine allows you to go all the way up to a 5 for TSH. Now, at that point, you're already functionally deficient in being able to convert TSH T4 to activated T3. Now, again, you can run all of these labs. You can see what's going on. But the body under stress, again, let's go back to the hypothalamus, right? So the hypothalamus in the brain, when it starts to produce the CRH, right, which tells the pituitary gland to produce that ACTH, which tells the adrenals to turn on first norepinephrine, second cortisol. When that happens, there's a specific downregulation of thyroid hormone. First, the conversion for thyroid-stimulating hormone to T4 gets blocked, right? First with norepinephrine. Secondarily, when you produce glucocorticoids, you can actually block the conversion of T3 inside the cells, or you convert active T3 to reverse T3, which is unusable, right? So we can see this. We can understand that this is also why you want to run TSH, T3, and T4 in your labs, and you want to look at cortisol levels as well because they interplay. So when you look at that, well, a lot of people suffer from low thyroid, which causes what? Well, sometimes it causes high cholesterol, it causes blood sugar dysregulation, it can cause lethargy, so now you don't even want to exercise because you're tired all the time. Cold hands, cold feet, and of course, weight gain. Well, how did that happen? Well, right back to the beginning of this model. High levels of cortisol can spike blood sugar, which can cause inflammation, which can then cause immune imbalance as well as weight gain. And when you begin to look at all of these underlying root causes from any level of stress, right? Viruses, work, relationships, life, caffeine intake, processed foods such as white breads and pastas and those types of things, all of those things, anything that can spike blood sugar or stress or anything like that in the body can lead to this cascade of hormones. It is not the body messing up. This is exactly how the body was meant to work. And although I've spoken about it in previous podcasts, that's why you can go back and you can just go to stephencabral.com/podcast. You can begin to see how all of this interconnects, how it all weaves together, and that at no point is the body messing up. It simply needs to be rebalanced. So in future weeks too, I'm going to explain more. And again, I've talked about this before in a podcast called How to Transition Off a Low Carb Diet, because I can't talk about everything in one podcast because I want to respect your time and keep this under 30 minutes. But it's this, is that in the beginning, yes, you do need to lower blood sugar. So you do need to go predominantly vegetables for the diet. And again, I've explained this. It's part of the Dr. Ball detox, right? The 21-day Dr. Ball detox helps to reset hormones, reset inflammation. If you look at this, right? Cortisol, the blood sugar, to inflammation and weight gain. Well, what does the Dr. Ball detox do? It helps to regulate the weight gain, the inflammation, the blood sugar, and the cortisol. So at that time, as we're doing the 21-day Dr. Ball detox, and again, you don't have to do it, but you can look it up, and the information is all free. So you can do whatever detox you choose, but it should be a functional medicine one. It's not a cleanse. It's not anything like that. It's very, very different. And again, if you don't know about a detox because you're new to the podcast, look up how to complete a functional medicine detox. So what we do is we're beginning to re-regulate the body. And again, I don't want to go through it because I'm about to go into exactly how to do that. I'll do that on a future show. So yes, there is a temporary time of lowering carbohydrates, but then you must begin to work on stress and all the different forms of stress, too hard of workouts, or not getting enough sleep, or like all of the things that I talk about, right? That ramp up that sympathetic nervous system, higher levels of caffeine if that affects you, beginning to maybe look at your blood sugar with the glucometer, all of these things that are within your control. And then you have to, at some point, begin to increase carbohydrates. Now, how much? Well, that depends on you, your body type, right? Your dosha, and your insulin sensitivity. But your job is to actually work that up. Carbohydrates are not the enemy. Begin to think that. But really, it's vegetables and berries and some other fruits that have been shown, the only things to be shown, which I'm going to do another podcast on this. Those are the things that help prevent cancer and dis-ease in the body. It's not fats intake. It's not protein intake. It is produce. So we have to keep that in mind. It's not the enemy. The enemy is actually a lack of education around the topic. That's the real enemy, because I know that if you get the education and the know-how, you'll be able to implement this. You'll be able to lose the weight. You'll be able to get well, and you'll be able to really live life with the zest and vitality that you need, and that only comes with being able to burn body fat and glucose. So hopefully today's show was helpful. I thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if this information was helpful to you, please do feel free to pass along to anyone else you believe it can serve. And one more thing before I go, if you want to test your thyroid levels, you want to test your adrenal levels, your glucose levels, you want to be able to test any of those stress hormones, simply go to stephencabral.com/957. I will link up all of those lab tests there. Take care, everyone. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only two ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.